Welcome back, everybody. This video may be a little bit tedious to some, perhaps not as much to others. Either way, stay with me. I promise we're going to have a good laugh at the end, and it will all be worth it. A fan of the channel with the email name of Alexander the Great sent me an email with the stupidest claim about Muhammad in the Bible I have ever seen. Let's take a look. Here it is. Isaiah 29:12 mentions the first Quran revelation. And you can see this article is quite long. And with a bunch of words come a bunch of opportunities to look like a fool, and he doesn't miss many. We'll look at a couple of examples before we take a look at his specific argument. First, we should note that he is using a Muslim hermeneutical approach that allows for a favorable interpretation. Now, when I saw that, I wondered, where have I heard this before? This sort of conclusion-based research where the desired outcome determines one's methodology. Oh yes, when Islamic scholars Abdülkılıç and Asalu wanted to make a critical edition of 2 manuscripts of the Quran, but the Tashkent was so horribly corrupted that it would not yield a healthy result, and they abandoned the project. So watch for that as we go through this video. You'll see that the desired conclusion is what drives the research. We're using a Muslim hermeneutical approach that allows for a favorable interpretation. Now, another problem with this article is that he includes a paraphrase from some specialists that he had contacted, but he doesn't realize that the paraphrase of the information that he received provides an infinitely more plausible reason for the textual correction than the one he himself suggests. You can pause the video and read it if you want. We'll interact with some of that information later on, but the reason for the scribal change is clearly given. The author of the article, however, appears not to understand it. Also, if you're going to quote someone, make sure you understand the quote. When describing the alterations that we're going to see in this video, the quote talks about them being purely negative. And CB3 makes practically no positive and original contribution to the text. Now, the problem here is that he takes negative to be bad and positive to be good, but negative means an omission or something erased, whereas a positive change means something is added. But since he thinks that negative means bad and positive means good, he says that the errors were deepened and made things worse, acknowledging CB3's injurious editorship and his unfortunate insertions. His comment on the quote is not only ignorant, it contradicts the quote. Right after saying there are no positive corrections, which means nothing added, he says that there were unfortunate insertions. He has no idea what he's talking about. Let's make this a bit more clear. The corrector, known as CB3, seems to make no positive contribution to the text. He simply removes additions and substitutions by previous correctors and touches the spelling of the original text. If you're going to quote something, make sure you understand what you're quoting. But remember, we're using a Muslim hermeneutical approach that allows for a favorable interpretation. Now, in typical Muslim fashion, he proclaims that he knows what Isaiah 29:12 says, while at the same time he maintains that the Bible is hopelessly corrupted. We are not off to a good start, and it's going to get a lot worse. Let's look specifically at the argument. He says the name Hira, which refers to the cave where Muhammad allegedly received his first revelation, was mentioned in the Greek text of Isaiah 29:12, but this word was changed in Codex Sinaiticus. Now, Codex Sinaiticus is also called Aleph, and that's what we'll refer to it as in this video for some convenient shorthand. He says the text of Isaiah 29:12 should be translated like this: "And the book will be delivered in Hira to an illiterate man. And one shall say to him, 'Read this,' and he shall say, 'I am not learned.'" Now, what's his basis for this? Let's take a look. Let's start at the top of the diagram. I have original there, according to the theory of the article that we're looking at, and that was changed by the corrector known as CB3, and it was changed to hide the name of Muhammad's cave. The corrector then added what you see in red, that E or epsilon, and then at the end I have a small c written, which is a lunate sigma. And you'll see why I have it written in that small font later on. And then down at the bottom is kind of a flow diagram. You can see the original chi, Yoda wrote alpha, and then the corrector CB3 inserted that epsilon. And then at the top line, I have 3 question marks after corrector, and you'll see why that is. So that's the theory. 2 letters were added, disguising the name of Muhammad's cave. Let's take a look at the text critical apparatus. There we see the corrector, CB3, added that epsilon, which is not present in the original word. But you may notice a problem. I have the original and the corrected version both in red boxes now, and you can see that sigma, which has a slightly different form, and we'll talk about why that is present in both the original and in the corrected word. Now let's go to the website for the actual manuscript itself. It's a really cool tool, allows you to navigate the manuscript and view corrections and so forth. One wonders why Islamic scholars haven't done something like this for Quranic manuscripts. Always lagging behind, aren't they? The word in question is in the red box, and then you can see the two arrows. He needs, remember, both that E or epsilon as well as that small sigma at the end. He needs both of those to be scribal changes. But as we saw from the apparatus, he only gets one. But what about that little letter at the end, that small sigma? It certainly looks like an afterthought. Actually, it's not. It's a very common occurrence, and we can see others in close proximity. Here's another example. The word that we're looking for is circled in red at the bottom. Of course, you can see that small sigma at the end. And then several lines above, you can see another occurrence of the same thing. In fact, this compression is a well-known scribal feature. Scribe A starts to compress letters back in the line up to the 6th or 7th letter, and in poetic books, even farther back. And we can take a look at some examples of this from Scribe A. There are two from the book of Proverbs. Scribe B, and that's the one we're looking at in this video for Isaiah 29, rarely compresses letters further than 3 letters from the line ending. And of course in Isaiah 29:12 it happens right at the end of the line. Now, the author of this article knows that he needs both textual variants to make his case. He needs that epsilon and the sigma, but he also knows, at least I think he does, that the text critical apparatus only gives him one. It only gives him the epsilon. So, what does he do? Think about it. Think really hard. That's right, he uses a Muslim hermeneutical approach that allows for a favorable interpretation. He asks, but what about the sigma? What is the nature of this textual intervention? Does this step taken by the anonymous CB3 consisting in adding the 5th and 6th? Notice how he goes from a question, what about the sigma, to it is a textual intervention, and it is an addition of a 6th letter. Notice he has no justification whatsoever for saying the sigma was added by a corrector to disguise the name of Muhammad's cave. No justification whatsoever. The apparatus doesn't support it. The manuscript doesn't support it. As we've seen, compressed letters are a common feature of the scribes who wrote the manuscript. It's that simple. I even contacted a specialist to quadruple check myself, and he said no. Absolutely, the sigma is original. Let's get back to our diagram and see where we're headed. We began here with a theory that we had 4 letters originally, and then 2 were added, but we saw that the sigma was original. So we moved to step 2. The sigma is original, and now we need to talk about the epsilon that you still see there in red. Remember I said that the author of this article ignorantly refers to an explanation which is infinitely more plausible than his own? Well, it comes back to haunt him. Here he talks about confusion in sounds between various letters, and he refers to it as an iticism. So let's rewind to the days before we had copy machines. How do you make a bunch of copies of a manuscript? Well, a good way to do it is to have a scribe read from the manuscript that needs to be copied, and then you have a bunch of other scribes who write down what they hear. Now, this is probably the best possible way that you can do this, but of course, there are errors that can result, and an iticism is one such error. And in the case of scribe B, which is the scribe that we're dealing with here in Isaiah, this happens a lot. Now, the correction we've been looking at is the one circled in red. And as you can see, in the same column, in the blue circles, I have 3 more examples of the exact same correction. This is nothing unique, folks. It happens a lot, especially with Scribe B. Apparently he had some spelling issues. He comes in at 78.2 iticisms per folio, and that is much higher than his fellow scribes. So the correction that we've been looking at in this video deserves no special attention. There's no need for Islamic conspiracy theories. Oh, but I forgot, this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is a Muslim hermeneutical approach that allows for a favorable interpretation. Let's update our diagram. The hypothetical original was originally 4 letters, and we saw in step 1 that the sigma at the end was actually original. So we updated that to step 2, but we still have that pesky little epsilon. In step 3, we saw that the corrector CB3 made a very frequently required correction for a well-known phenomenon, and he added that epsilon, as he did in many other places in that very same column, and indeed throughout the text itself. It's as simple as that. Now let's take a humor break before heading to the summary. Not only do we have this embarrassingly ignorant analysis provided to us by this slave of Allah, but we also have a story about how this happened, about how the monk disguised the name of Muhammad's cave. And for this, we're certainly going to... Yes, there we go. All right, are you ready for the story of the monk who changed the name of Muhammad's cave? I think that at the beginning, the monks were probably not aware of the meaning of this word, but sooner or later, members of the Coptic community who lived under the Islamic government must have heard about the story of Al-Alaq, which occurred to Prophet Muhammad in the cave of Hira. When suddenly they realized that Isaiah 29:12 is alluding to that incident, one of them immediately rushed towards the codex and intervened. His goal was to alter the meaning of the whole context by manipulating with the text as possible as he could. Wow, I can't believe the Jews paid me for this. All right, in summary, let's look at just some of the methodological flaws of the article that we've seen. You have to ignore all of the other relevant manuscripts, all of them, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, all of them. One has to ignore the wider context of Isaiah 29:12. The previous verse, for example, talks about literate people. That whole part seems to be left out of Muhammad's cave story. When we go to the verse after 12, we see the Lord talking about people whose hearts are far from him. Muslims who try to find Muhammad here, once again, pick a very bad spot for him to land. Muslims have to pretend like the epsilon correction is a unique variant, that it's conspicuous, that we should pay attention to it for some reason, when in reality we've seen it is a very common correction that needs to be made with the scribe who copied the prophets. Muslims need to pretend that the small c, that little lunate sigma at the end, was added by the corrector CB3, but as we saw, it was not. It was original. Muslims have to assume the monks believed there was a connection between Isaiah 29:12 and Muhammad, which is laughable. They have to assume that the correction attributed to CB3 occurred after the story of Muhammad's cave was known. But let's go back to the website that the author of the article himself references. These corrections are placed between the 5th and 7th centuries. As always, to give their arguments the appearance of plausibility, Muslims need to push non-Islamic material as late as possible and Islamic material as early as possible. This ad hoc methodology has far exceeded its shelf life. So that's our summary. There's more that we could say, but we'll stop there. What is it that makes Muslims want to climb to such heights of ignorance? Muhammad is described in the Torah and the Gospel. And of course, when we look at the interpretation for this verse, Muslim ignorance is on full display. Forget about just the Torah and Gospel. Find Muhammad somewhere, anywhere at all in the Bible. Change the text if you need to, or simply insert Muhammad's name at will. Even finding a Hebrew word that sounds like Muhammad will be good enough. For centuries, Muslims have been trying to prove their God right, but they've been unable to find Muhammad in the Bible. Thus, contrary to the numerous positive confirmations that the Quran gives of both the Torah and the Gospel, Muslims claim that the Bible has simply been corrupted and all references to Muhammad have been removed, a fact that the Quran is apparently ignorant of. Muslims basically have two options. They can admit that the Quran is wrong and Muhammad was never in the Bible, or they can contradict the Quran by claiming that the Bible is corrupted and references to Muhammad have been removed. Or they have another option. They can use a favorable Muslim hermeneutical approach to find him again. I sincerely hope this video helps Muslims see how desperate their scholars are to get Muhammad in the Bible and the egregious errors they're willing to commit in doing so. I hope this helps Muslims see the deception that they're willing to engage in, both with themselves as well as the Muslims who are convinced by their arguments. Muhammad's not in the Bible. He never was. I'll see you next time.